Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional, a best-selling author, joining us for the second time on The Brand Called You, Dr. Dhruv Nath from New Delhi, India. Dhruv, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. I'm not sure I'm accomplished, but I can talk.
Absolutely. Dr. Nath is an author of a book titled The Earnicorns, Stories of Rare, Profitable Unicorns, and we can see his book right here. He's a director of the Lead Angels Network. He was earlier the senior vice president of NIIT and the professor at MDI Gurgaon, and he's a co-author of a book titled Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares. That's his other book. Wonderful. So, Dhruv, we spoke about your first book last time we spoke. Today, we're going to speak about your new book, The Earnicorns, Stories of Rare, Profitable Unicorns. And I'm going to ask all our viewers and listeners to go and check out Dr. Dhruv Nath's book. So, my first question to you is, what inspired you to write your book?
So first of all, thanks a lot, Ashutosh, for having me here. You know, one of the things that's been happening in the world of the internet is it is almost assumed that if you're running an internet business, you have to be loss making. Right? It's almost God given.
Mm.
I mean, God has said you can't make a profit, and
Yep.
people say, wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'll explain the reason for that.
Mm.
Um, when the internet came in and started getting used in business, um, there is a term that we use. We say geography had become history.
Correct.
Basically, what does that mean? That means your customer now doesn't have to be only local. Your customer can be anywhere in the world or anywhere in the country, right?
Mm.
And therefore, the bigger guys in any business, in any segment, the bigger guys get bigger and bigger because they build their brand, they have economies of scale and so on. And the smaller guys get left out and ultimately die. Right?
Correct.
So there was almost a rush towards let us be the bigger guys, let us try and reach dominance. And investors were very happy.
Mm.
They said, look, we will keep funding you provided you're becoming one of the bigger guys reaching a position of dominance. And unfortunately, it became growth at any cost,
Correct.
even at a loss. Investors said, don't worry, you're making a loss. We will still fund you, provided you're growing rapidly.
Mm.
So this continued for a long, long, long time. Right? By the way, fortunately, it's changing now. But fortunately, so incidentally, these are not real businesses. They're loss making.
Yeah.
The word unicorn, which refers to an internet business which has a valuation of over $1 billion, frankly, it's a mythical animal. Unicorn is a mythical animal. And similarly, these are mythical businesses. They're not real, but they keep getting funded. They can't survive on their own. Fortunately, there have been a few companies which are market leaders, and for years and years and years, they have been profitable. They're unicorns, way above unicorns, market leaders in their own spheres,
Mm.
but they are profitable. And, that's the way to be. You can be a market leader,
Correct.
you can grow, but not at any cost. Make a profit, make a sustainable business. That's the only way to be. Those are not mythical.
Mm.
Those are not unicorns. They are what I call earnicorns, right? Which is unicorns which earn money.
Very interesting. And I hope you've protected the term Earnicorns by patenting the word or getting all the rights to yourself. It's
My
absolutely
son is a lawyer.
okay. You must ask him to put a little TM in front of
uh,
Earnicorn.
maybe yes, yes.
But moving on, and I completely agree with you. When I was growing up after business school, and we were always taught the purpose of business is to make a profit. And that seems to have changed somewhere along the line. But my question to you is, how do investors view profitable unicorns compared to those that are still growing and loss making?
So, as I was mentioning earlier, fortunately, the attitude of investors has changed.
Correct.
And there are several reasons for that.
Mm.
One is, this has been going on for the last about 25 odd years, ever since the internet came in. And investors have got a little fed up of waiting for profits, right? They kept hoping that once these unicorns were large enough and, you know, uh, were running monopoly businesses, at that stage they would become profitable. It wasn't happening in most cases.
Mm.
Then, of course, you had COVID, right? And then you had the Ukraine war, and the world went into a tizzy. There was recession. American interest rates started going up, so money became more and more scarce.
Mm.
So, on the one hand, investors got fed up of waiting, for these so-called mythical profits,
Mhm.
and B, money anyway got scarce. So, investors started saying, "Look, we are no longer interested in loss-making companies, loss-making unicorns.
Mm.
Now, we don't mind if you're making a loss, but show us a path to profitability."
Correct. Correct.
1 year later, 1.5 years later, maybe 2 years later, your cash burn has to start coming down, not going up.
Correct.
If that is happening, we are willing to fund you.
Mm.
So I would say today, for these multiple reasons, the world of internet businesses has solidly changed. And today, investors are very clear path to profitability, and loss making and constantly loss making not acceptable.
Said. Well said. And when you started work on your book, and I think you've taken 4 of these profitable companies, what are some of the common traits that you have found among the founders of these Earnicorns?
Okay. Many of them, but I'll mention maybe a couple.
Yeah.
Number one, I think all 4 of them, without exception, they were clear. We are not going to create a loss-making business.
Correct.
Very, very clear, right? Number one. Number two, extremely, extremely strongly customer focused.
Mm.
Extremely strongly. And I'll give you an example from one of these companies. So the 4 companies I have talked about are InfoEdge, which is basically Naukri along with 3 other siblings. There is Zerodha, which is the market leader. In fact, the world leader in terms of number of transactions, volume of transactions. And then there is a Dream 11, and then there is Zoho.
Mm.
So I'll just take an example from Zerodha. When I talk about very, very strong focus on the customer, these guys, so Nitin Kamath is the founder of Zerodha. He is very clear. He does not want to fool the customer. He wants to help the customer to learn and to make money in the long run.
Mm.
No shortcuts, right? So they have, as part of their offering, a very interesting feature called Nudge.
Mm.
And Nudge is a very interesting feature. A lot of traders, investors, they take risky bets.
Mm.
And the software tries to analyze the kind of bet that the trader or the investor is taking and nudges him not to take it.
I see.
So even though Zerodha would get brokerage in case that trade goes through,
Mm.
they try and tell the trader, don't avoid taking it. Of course, if the trader insists, he can go ahead, but they try and prevent him from doing it. Now, this is phenomenal customer focus. They're telling the customer, boss, we don't care about our revenues. You should do the right thing.
Mm.
And therefore, customers trust them.
Mm.
And when customers trust you, they stay with you, they don't leave, right? You don't have to keep looking for new customers because the existing guy is with you, and the existing guy talks to other people. Word of mouth spreads. Okay, look, these guys are going to be, they look after you,
Mm.
more customers join in. So I think that is common across all these 4. Very, 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 very strong focus on looking after the customer. There are obviously many others, but I think these are the top 2.
Very interesting. And, all 4 of them are leaders in different areas. What is unique about their business models that make them so profitable?
Okay. So again, let me take an example. The reason, so one, of course, is the whole attitude which I just spoke about.
Mm.
And when you are so customer focused, you actually need to spend less on marketing.
Correct.
A, B, because your existing customers stay with you, You don't need to get new customers, or you need to get less of them.
Yeah.
So your marketing cost, which is normally a very large chunk of anybody's cost, that is taken care of. Let me take another example from this uh, the book. So I'll talk about one of the other companies, which is Dream 11. Right. By the way, one other very, very strong feature across all these guys is looking after people,
I see.
looking after their teams. A, you look after your customer, and B, you look after your teams.
Correct.
Dream 11, as you're aware, Ashutosh, is in the business of fantasy sport.
Correct.
So I'll just explain that to your viewers. So let's say there is a match, cricket, football, whatever, and let's say it's a so it's 11 players aside between, for example, India and Australia. And each person who wants to play that fantasy sport game gets onto the Dream 11 internet platform. And out of these 22 players, selects his 11 players. Right? So he'll select maybe, 6 players from India, five from Australia, and so on. And that's his team. So he's a selector. Now, when this match takes place, so let's say you selected Virat Kohli as part of your team, and Virat Kohli scores a century. Everybody who's playing this fantasy sport game, who has selected Virat Kohli as part of the team, will get points.
Okay.
Right? Similarly, let's say Mitchell Stark, the bowler, you selected him as part of your team. He doesn't take any wickets. You don't get points. Everybody who's taken Mitchell Stark doesn't get points. So finally, when this game is over, they look at the points accumulated by all the players, and you obviously need to pay something for playing. But at the end of that, the top few get prize money.
I see.
So that's the way it works. Now, look at what happened during COVID, and I think this was a phenomenal eye opener for me. Look at what happened during COVID. No games, no physical sport, therefore no fantasy sport.
Correct.
No game going on. How can you create your own team, right? And therefore, revenues were almost zero for that, I think, 1.5 years, 1.5 years probably, right? 2020 to about, I would imagine, the middle of 2021. Now you have zero revenues or almost zero revenues. Most internet companies, what would they do? Their favorite color would be pink, which means pink slips. Sack 500 people, sack 200 people, sack 100 people, sack 1,000 people. These guys did not lay off even one person, even one. Okay? Even though the revenues were zero. And the message they gave was so strong. They said, look, during good times, you had looked after the company. So during bad times, the company will look after you.
Right.
And what this does is, like I said, the customer starts trusting the company. Here, the team starts trusting the company. Look, this company will look after me. And therefore, they don't leave. And, I didn't believe it when I heard this. The manpower turnover in this company is a pittance. It's 4% per year.
Wow.
Now, for an internet company, 4% is probably an Olympic record. It doesn't exist.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Yes. So because of this, people stay on. They're very happy. They're highly motivated. They know the company looks after them. They don't need to replace people, retrain people, etc., etc. That is one major factor which impacts profitability. And by the way, this is true across the board, across all these four companies. Look after their teams. People hang on to them. They're motivated, very highly productive. No need to replace people.
Fascinating. Fascinating. So my next question to you, and these are profitable companies, Dhruv, but all of them have also raised funding at some stage or the other. And I understand a company like Zerodha may not have raised anything at all. What are some of the key differences in the funding strategies of these four Earnicorns?
Okay, you're right. So in fact, at the end of the book, I've talked about what is common and what is different. And to me, the fascinating thing is what was different. Zerodha and Zoho never raised any funding except from obviously personal sources, friends, family, etc. Right? Dream 11 raised 8 rounds of funding. And InfoEdge was somewhere in between. I think they raised, they had one IPO and two QIPs and one more round from a VC very, very early on. So a total of 4 rounds, right? So two guys never, one person 8 times, one 4 times. The interesting thing is you talk to Sridhar Vembu, who's the founder of Zoho, and you talk to Nitin Kamath, who's the founder of Zerodha. They say this is one of the best decisions we have taken. The fact that we never took money. You talk to Harsh Jain, who's the founder of Dream 11. He says this is one of the best decisions I took. So it's fascinating to see the difference. And I tell you what their logic was. Let me talk about Zoho. So I don't know if your viewers are aware. Zoho has a brilliant experiment that they've carried out in rural Karnataka, right? So what they do is they say, why should a programmer have an engineering degree? You have brilliant young boys and girls who live in the villages who cannot go beyond class 12 because their parents can't afford it. And therefore, that's the end of their education. We will create something called Zoho Schools, and now there are two branches, one in Chennai and one in a tiny village called Mathalamparai, south of Tamil Nadu, in a district called Tenkasi, which is where, by the way, it's also headquartered, the company. So they take in these guys. Now, obviously, because they're taking in people who never had an opportunity, they can choose from such a large pool that they get the best, by far the best. And they go through the Zoho schools for 2 years. They pay nothing, they get a stipend. And they are also doing a kind of internship, which basically means that they are working with other people who are doing projects at Zoho. Now, this is a phenomenal experiment. Sridhar says, and this is the founder, right? He says, when you are running a startup, and particularly if you're running a company in the space of the internet, you have to be nimble. You have to be able to take decisions which the investor may not agree with.
Right.
Which investor would have allowed me to take this experiment, to do this experiment, right? In fact, he says, one investor told me I need an exit definitely at the end of 7 years. Sridhar says, how can I promise that? So what is good for the company may not be good for the investor, right? Same thing Zerodha said. And Dream 11, Harsh Jain said, look, we were young guys. In his own words, we were spoiled brats. We got money from our father, we blew it up. We didn't know how to run a company. We are very grateful to our investors because they gave us a lot of guidance that helped us to build this business. So I think, the attitude of these investors is so different. And both of them, all three of them say this is the best decision we took.
Amazing, amazing. And yet, as you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, how a lot of these companies or the internet companies were looking at global businesses. My question is, how did the founders of these four companies balance the pursuit of profitability with the need for growth?
So I think the one thing which was very clear amongst these guys was that we will not grow at any cost, right? If it means we grow a little slower than otherwise, too bad. That's okay. So be it. We will be profitable. So I'll give you the story of Naukri. When these guys started Naukri, one of the advantages they had, major advantages they had, was that there was actually nobody else in the field except for one other Indian company called Jobs Ahead. And that was in around the year 97, 98. So nearly 30 years ago, right? And these guys said, we won't take money and we will remain profitable. And they were profitable. What happened was Jobs Ahead actually got a huge amount of funding from a VC. And therefore, they started splurging on marketing. Now, these guys had a problem at Naukri. They said, look, now, if we don't take money, we may not be able to survive. So they took money. But again, I go back to, the attitude of all these guys. Attitude of all these guys is run a frugal business. They don't waste money. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, who's the founder of Naukri, of InfoEdge actually, he says, look, if you're spending on things like five-star hotels and business class travel and, fancy cars and so on, you won't make money.
Hmm.
So this guy actually started his operations from the servant's quarter above the garage in his father's house.
Amazing. Hmm.
Second-hand computer, second-hand furniture,
Hmm.
right? And he would go around making sales call on an old, I think it was a Vespa scooter. If you remember, in
Hmm.
those days, Vespa used to be
Yeah.
one of the popular brands.
Hmm.
So they were very clear. We will run a frugal business, and
Hmm.
therefore, what they did was they, after they raised this money,
Hmm.
half of it was put into a fixed deposit.
Hmm.
Okay, only half was used for running their business because they said very, very clearly, look, if you have too much money sloshing around, the term
Yeah.
Sanjeev likes to use is sloshing around,
Hmm.
you get into bad habits.
Hmm.
You should be slightly squeezed with regard to money. Only then will you be able to run a profitable business. So I think across the board,
Hmm.
these guys tried to cut cost, except where it uh, would impact the business, and
Amazing.
that is what for
Yeah.
all of them as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Dhruv, I have time for two more questions. Uh, do you see, given all the work that you've done in your research in the startup ecosystem, and you're also, uh, a startup mentor, do you see a rise in the number of Earnicorns in the future? And if yes, why or why not?
Definitely. See, if you look at the past, and I mean the term internet businesses started really about 25, 30 odd years ago, right?
Right.
Somewhere in the late 90s.
Hmm.
And at that time, they were all investor supported.
Okay.
And they were loss making, they were investor supported. The moment you remove investor money, you have no choice.
Correct.
Either you die or you move towards profitability. If you look at what's happened in the recent past, there are many companies which were earlier unicorn but loss making, they
Hmm.
become unicorns.
Amazing.
Policy Bazaar, which is PB FinTech,
Hmm.
Zomato,
Hmm.
right? Make My Trip,
Hmm.
huge market leader, clear number one, loss making, but now investors will not give you money and therefore you're forced to become profitable. So yes, early stage companies,
Hmm.
there's no choice. You will make a loss because you'll have to develop your product. Maybe you have to do initial marketing, which may not give you revenues in the near term. So initially, it is accepted. But if this continues, you won't get investor money, you will die.
Hmm.
Therefore, everybody has moved away from growth at any cost
Hmm.
to growth with profits.
Certainly.
And that is the future. And it's a great thing because these are real companies. Unicorns are not real companies.
Correct. Correct. Well said. And my
And
last
that's
question.
worldwide. Sorry, that's worldwide, not just India.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you completely. And my last question, Shubhro, what would you say are some of the key takeaways from your book for startup entrepreneurs and business leaders?
I think, okay, so one of the things I have used in this book is I have tried to coin something called the perfect attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And perfect is an acronym,
Mm.
right? So P stands for persevering,
Mm.
E stands for ethical,
Mm.
R stands for responsible,
Mm.
F stands for flexible,
Mm.
right? Next T is everything, which is willing to do everything.
Mm.
C is customer focused,
Mm.
and T is builds trust.
Amazing.
Now, I've shared with you a few stories where I talked about customer focus and building trust and so on. I'll just go back to Sanjeev's
Yeah.
story.
Mm.
You know, this guy had, you couldn't ask for better qualifications. He had a degree from St. Stephen's College,
Mm.
and then he had an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad.
Mm.
And he worked with Lintas as well as HMM, so multinational, right?
Mm.
Phenomenal qualification. 1990s when he started doing something on his own. For 7 years, he was floundering, absolutely floundering.
Mm.
And I remember, uh, can I make one Hindi
Yes,
statement
of
here?
course. Of course
Okay.
you can.
So he was floundering, and he told me actually, I met him several times. He says, I was living with my parents, इसीलिए घर में चूल्हा जलता था.
Wow.
That means We were able to survive at home because I was living with my parents, right? In the initial days. 7 years, and several times he didn't take a salary because the company couldn't afford it. So, number one, persevering. He kept on and on and on and on. Finally, Naukri.com got launched in April 1997. That's 7 years.
Yeah.
Persevering. That's the first step in my the P in my perfect attitude.
Yeah.
He was flexible. He tried all kinds of business models. In fact, when he started, he was looking at something in the area of trademarks, not in recruitment at all, right? And then he moved to doing salary surveys for corporates. That didn't work out. It wasn't a growing business. Then he moved to providing job opportunities to job seekers. There was no internet, so that didn't work. He tried couriering floppies to distributors who would then make it available to local guys. It didn't work. Finally, the internet came in somewhere around 1997 and things worked. So flexible. He tried multiple business models before things worked. So I would say, frankly, not everybody can become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Very, very obvious. But if you want to, please make sure you have just the right attitude. And I call it the perfect attitude. Learn from these four guys. They are brilliant guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And on that note, Dhruv, and the amazing perfect attitude that you've spoken about, thank you so much for speaking to me about your book. I think you've highlighted in such a short time how critical it is for startups to start their journey on a path to profit.
Yes.
I just love the way you said all these four companies that and I'm sure there are many, many more as well, but these four companies look after the customer first, look after their people, have built strong culture, are very thrifty, careful with their money. I love the way you spoke about how Sanjeev said 50% of the money went into fixed deposit, and Sanjeev I know very well, is that the money is not sloshing around, as you said. But it's been an amazing conversation that I've just had with you. All the very best for your book, The Earnicorns, Stories of Rare, Profitable Unicorns. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.